Hi again, everyone. Welcome to a bonus edition of the Trial Watchers podcast, a podcast about true crime fans for true crime fans. I'm your host, Mike Pachenik, and joining me is my Trial Watchers co-creator and partner, Neil Gordon. Hey, Neil.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well, sir. And we are recording this in beautiful Augusta, Georgia, in your backyard.
Yeah, I can hear the birds chirping.
I can. It's a beautiful day. The sun is rising, and we're ready to talk about some true crime.
Fantastic. Let's kick it off.
So it's been a minute since we've joined you, and a lot has transpired. And I think the most interesting development is that we have officially launched our 5-part documentary series that explores our fascination with true crime. And you can stream it in a number of places, including a place you may have heard of, Amazon Prime TV. But it's also on Fawesome TV, and it's going to be on Tubi sometime soon, streaming on a television near you.
Groovy with Tubi.
Indeed. And I thought we could walk our listeners briefly through each episode to give them a taste of what they can expect when they watch. So, Neil, it was about November of 2023 when I came to Augusta to start shooting this documentary series, and that is when we encountered our first two characters, Carolyn and Mary, who are sisters. They affectionately call themselves the Heifers, and we were floored by their story. We set them up for an interview because they take these road trips to go see trials and to go to the beach and do other things. We had no idea about their backstory and their why. And that makes up episode 1, which is called Justice Seeking Sisters.
I vividly recall a light bulb moment when you just simply asked them, why do you go to these trials anyway? Because they had gone to a few different ones. And you looked at me and I looked at you when one of the sisters mentioned that their father was murdered about 40 plus years ago.
Yeah, and they vividly described the pain that they had gone through after their father, who was a locksmith in Atlanta, was murdered in a robbery attempt, and how the perpetrator was never brought to justice. They had a name. Mary said she carried that person's name around in her pocket for all of those years. She wanted to exact revenge and never did it. They've sort of carried that story around, and I don't even think they realized it at the time, but the fact that they didn't get justice for their own father is informing why they like to go to these trials like the Alex Murdaugh case to see other people face justice.
That's true. In fact, they met my wife, Melissa, who I call the OG trial watcher because she was sort of the trigger or reason why we explored this. But they met each other at the Alex Murdaugh trial and discovered that they had sort of a bond together. Melissa had been through a similar situation, only on the other side. One of her relatives was accused and then convicted of murder in Augusta back in the mid-1990s. And Melissa was in the courtroom because she felt empathy for the family members of Alex Murdaugh, because that was her back in the day. People were looking at her and she felt shamed and so forth. And the both of them were also just very fascinated to be there and see things develop and watch Alex Murdaugh on the stand. And we captured their feelings about that.
And in Justice Seeking Sisters, you'll see how those two stories intertwined, and there's some surprises near the end about some of the commonalities between Melissa and the sisters. So you'll want to check that out. Justice Seeking Sisters is the first episode. So Neil, the impetus for this entire project was the Alex Murdaugh case and your relationship with Becky, the now disgraced former clerk of court there in Colleton County. And Becky was the inspiration for episode number 2, aptly named, Oh My God, Becky.
Which is, what's the song, Sir Lancelot?
Yes, that's an ode to the 1990s hit song about people's behinds, if I recall. Yes, an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah.
But as we're recording this podcast episode, fact, on this very day, Becky Hill is due back in a Columbia, South Carolina courtroom on a perjury charge related to her testimony in the evidentiary hearing back in 2024.
Early 2024.
You attended that hearing.
Yeah.
And of course, she's facing a number of other charges, unfortunately, related to her time in office there in Colleton County. This episode really takes viewers behind the scenes of that really tumultuous time in your life and Melissa's life as you navigated releasing Behind the Doors of Justice with Becky Hill and the fallout that ensued.
Yeah, there were so many highs and lows. I mean, we sold almost 15,000 books. We were the first out to discuss the behind-the-scenes activities that went on in the Murdaugh trial, told by a sitting clerk of court, and in the end, things detonated on Becky. We go through a plagiarism scandal where she acknowledged she plagiarized a chapter in the book. The attorneys for Alec Murdaugh have pushed this storyline, if you will, that their client Alex did not get a fair trial. They held a press conference Labor Day-ish in 2023, not too long after the trial, just after the book came out. And they believe that Becky tampered with the jury. And August the 10th is the day that the state has to answer claims about whether or not Alec Murdaugh is deserving of a new trial. And so we explore a lot of these issues, and my wife Melissa recorded so much of this. We tried to document everything, and I think if people do happen to go to trialwatchers.com and learn where you can pick this documentary up and watch it, it's pretty fascinating. It truly is peeling back the curtain on what it was like behind the scenes in this juggernaut of a trial and all the fallout.
Yeah, lots of fallout, and the ripple effects are still being felt today. So we'll certainly wish Becky the best, but we'll see how it pans out.
People ask me, Mike, do you think Becky will go to jail? And what I often say is, some of those charges, I don't think so. I think they're a little more on the administrative side, misconduct in office. But boy, being accused of, and if it's true that she lied to a judge during her evidentiary hearing, perjury and obstruction of justice, which the accusation is she took sealed documents and handed it out to a media outlet during the trial. And our understanding is those were autopsy photos of the murders. So, awful situation, and I agree with you, Mike. You just you wish for the best, and you wish that justice is served.
So, in episode 3, we chronicle the interesting life and times of a man named Jonathan Lee Riches, who goes by JLR Investigates on his YouTube channel. And Mel encountered him while she was at the Murdaugh trial, and there was just something about him that caught her eye, right, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, he had a press moniker on his t-shirt, but he didn't have a media badge. And he's kind of along the lines of this new wave of independent content creators. And we just checked, and he has 406,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel, and he posts multiple times a day, either in person at trials or examining and investigating cases, or just sort of what's in the news. In fact, he did a whole bunch on Brian Koberger and the victim impact statements, and we even used some clips in part 3 of our docuseries.
Yeah, so his whole mantra is boots on the ground, boots on the ground. He picks up and he travels to these either crime scene locations or to the trials themselves, and he gives his audience a bird's eye view of what it's like to be there. So yes, in this case, he went to Idaho in the dead of winter and was walking through this college town, documenting the scene there as investigators were trying to track down the murderer of these 4 college students. Ultimately, as we now know, it was Brian Koberger, who as we're recording this podcast, is a couple days removed from being sentenced to life in prison. You interviewed JLR outside of a Murdaugh hearing about his story, and it's pretty fascinating why he does this.
Well, just like you learned something so shocking from part one about the sisters and seeking justice for their father's murder, I learned that Jonathan Lee Riches has a pretty long rap sheet. He acknowledges he went to prison for 10 years, and he tries to take what he learned about going through the system, and he frames it from that lens as he tries to share an insider's perspective, if you will, about what could happen with these folks who are on trial. And it's just a different take. And it's just the world that we live in. And we just used a lot of what we call in the business natural sound clips of him doing his thing, going from trial to trial. And he's brash. You know, I'm from upstate New York, but he's from Philadelphia, and you can tell he's a northerner, and he's got a little edge, some would say aggressive.
Well, and he's not shy about telling his story subjects how he feels. You know, there's a scene in our Docuseries episode where he's yelling at Alec Murdaugh, which, you know, a traditional journalist would not do. And we also explore that aspect of this. These independent content creators, in some cases, have amassed more viewers than some of the cable networks. And we talked to a journalism professor about this phenomenon and sort of his suggestion to the end consumer about, okay, yes, it's infotainment. Is it journalism? You know, that remains to be seen. But he's a character, no less, certainly popular, and as you said, his subscriber base just continues to grow.
Absolutely.
So, Neil, as we're recording this episode, we're about a month and a half or so from CrimeCon 2025 in Denver, Colorado. Last year, the Trial Watchers crew attended CrimeCon 2024 in Nashville. And, man, do we have no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We went there initially to sell our book, and we got hired by Dr. Phil's network to go and gather some content for them, a lot of which has ended up in our docuseries here. That was the basis for episode 4, which is called Meet the Trial Watchers.
And we met so many, mostly women, who were there just because they're fangirls, the best way I could say it. It's no different from Comic-Con, if you will, where people just go and meet their favorite characters, or, you know, sometimes there's these different events with old-time movie stars, and they came there to see Nancy Grace. Yep. And, you know, John Benet Ramsey's father, John Ramsey, who we both interviewed them for the Meet the Trial Watchers program.
Yeah, and if you've never been to a crime con, let me briefly set the scene for you. It's 6,000 true crime fans who descend upon a convention center. And I had a preconceived notion going in, and I don't know about you, Neil, that they were there to discuss the macabre details of murders, and they had this prurient interest to learn about these awful situations. And what I discovered was it's really a family atmosphere. They're there to love on each other, to support each other, to support the crime victims' families. You know, Gabby Petito's family was there, for example. John Ramsey, as you mentioned, was there. And they were also there to learn about the latest in forensic criminal investigations. You know, in the episode 5, which we'll talk about in a minute, there was a whole seminar on the Rust shooting with Alec Baldwin, and a gun expert on stage doing an interview about projectiles and how guns fire, and it was fascinating stuff. And that is sort of the basis of this episode, where we profile a lot of these folks who showed up there, met some really interesting characters, including Lori and Christina.
Back to the idea of fangirls, you know, you and I have been on some baseball trips. I'm not a golfer, but I know several of my friends that go off with their golfing buddies on the weekend. And I think in a general sense, the feeling is the same. It's a feeling of bonding with a common theme of wanting the bad guy to get put away, the good guy to be set free, justice to be served. And it's this mantra that they wrap themselves in. And it's so fascinating, and it's a wonderful energy. The thing I was most surprised by, I'll never forget, the sister of her missing brother went around to the various exhibit booths, of which one of which was ours, selling our book Trial Watchers, and she had a flyer printed up with his picture from more than 20 years ago, still holding on to hope that he was alive. And there were several booths about missing loved ones, and I guess this is the community that it cares enough to maybe want to try to help and give hope.
Yeah. And John Ramsey even told us that in our interview with him. He talked about this community uplifting him and his family and demanding justice for Jean Bonnet, and a couple of years ago signing a petition asking the governor of Colorado to reopen the case. So there is this thirst for justice, and that was kind of the through line at this event. So that's Meet the Trial Watchers, episode number 4. So, Neil, I mentioned Lori and Christina. We met them at the conference. I was walking through the exhibit hall, getting sort of Vox Populi interviews with folks. And
Vox Populi?
Voice of the people.
Oh, very nice.
Yes. I think that's what that is, if I remember from my Latin classes. And I was wearing my Trial Watchers swag. And Lori and Christina gravitated to that. And they were like, that is a cool shirt. We need that shirt. So we brought them back to the booth. That began our relationship with Lori and Christina, and we touched back base with them a couple months after the event to record a podcast episode with them, which you can find here on this channel as well, where we took a deep dive into their history. But it was such a fascinating interview that we decided to turn it into episode 5. And we talked to them about their interesting history. They were at the Lori Vallow Daybell trial and met each other and discovered that they had like mutual family members and friends in common. They hit it off.
They sure did. It was incredible. And then we learned that in a span of 6 months, they had traveled to 3 different trials. The one you just mentioned, the Alec Baldwin trial, the Rush trial in New Mexico. And then they even went to Indiana and slept on cots. And we kind of captured that.
Yeah, the opening scene from episode 5 is the girls sleeping outside of the courthouse there in rural Indiana for the trial of the man who was convicted of murdering those 2 teenage girls on the bridge there, if you're familiar with that trial. But that's kind of, indicative of what these trial watchers do. They get to the stadium early and tailgate, in some cases sleeping overnight, so that they can get their golden ticket, punched to get a seat in the courtroom. I remember watching the Alec Baldwin proceedings on Court TV. I was just doing some work, and I look up, and I'm like, there's Christina in the second row, right behind Stephen Baldwin, just watching the proceedings.
And these 2 super true crime fans are really representative of the whole movement, if you will. Lori had gone through a terrible tragedy where her 2 nephews were killed, and we explore that as to what happened and how eerily similar that was to the Doomsday cult killings. Mm-hmm. And so she shared her feelings about it. And on the other side, Christina, who's a real spitfire, who's very talented. She's a sketch artist, and she actually drew some sketches in the Rush trial. We show some of those. But she wanted to grow up and be a lawyer. So she sort of is scratching her itch. And I think, Mike, what we also learned is women want to put the pieces of the puzzle together, mm-hmm. and they do so in different ways, whether it be on podcasts like this, whether they go to true crime conventions, whether they watch Court TV, read books. It's a fascinating movement.
Just to recap, you can find that on Amazon Prime Video for a nominal fee to purchase it there. It's also going to be on Fawesome TV, Fawesome Documentary, which you can find through your Roku or your Amazon Fire Stick. And those are free with ads. And then it's going to be on Tubi, which is a great streaming service. We've been lucky enough to have it licensed in a number of places. And it's doing really well in the UK, which is very interesting to me. That British true crime fans are gravitating to our show.
Incredible. I mean, at one time, 250,000 minutes were viewed, and it's obviously keeps growing and growing and growing. And then our main way that you can learn about what we're doing is just go to trialwatchers.com, and that's where you can support what we're doing, because our ultimate goal is to be able to continue the Docuseries and have a legacy of different stories, people who are just passionate about going to trials or just following cases. And I think there's just a lot more stories to be told.
Yeah, I would agree with you. There are a lot of really interesting folks who go to these trials. And, look, a lot of these podcasts, a lot of these content creators focus on the stories of the trials. We are turning the camera, the lens back on the consumer, the true crime fan, to learn their story. And so I think if you watch the series and you're a true crime fan, you will see some of yourself in those folks. And that's really our goal here, is to, as we like to say, we like to peel back the layers of the onion on these stories to give you kind of a deeper look into these folks.
And sometimes when you peel back the layers of the onion, there are tears. And sometimes you just learn a lot. Sometimes, as you say, about one's self. And it's just been a fascinating journey. And there's so much more to come.
Go to trialwatchers.com, and there you will find the links to all of our episodes, where you can find them. And don't forget, we still have a book for sale there called Trial Watchers. It is an anthology of short stories about our obsession with true crime. It explores some of the same stories as well as others. You can find that there on Amazon and wherever you buy your books. So for Neil Gordon, I am Mike Pachenik on this special episode of the Trial Watchers podcast. Until next time, take care.